Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. My name is Alexis Gingerella. I am the marketing and sales admin here at Recruiting Daily. Thanks for joining the webinar today, sponsored by our lovely friends at Lever. All right, so you're taking a look at our title slide, and we promise to jump right in soon, but before we get started, give me 1 minute to go over a few tips on how to use GoToWebinar, and then I'm going to hand everything over to Matt. Okay, so you're going to feel like you're listening to instructions on how to fasten your seatbelt and lifting those tray tables. But for those of you attending for the webinar for the first time, listen up. And if it's not your first time, just hang out with me for a second. First of all, audio. By default, you've joined listening through your computer's speaker system. If you'd like to listen to the webinar using your phone, find the audio pane on the right side of your screen and select Use Telephone. That will display the dial-in information and access code you will need. Second, participation. All of you are in listen-only mode in plain English. That means you will not have the ability to speak directly with our presenter, even though you wish you could, but you can ask as many questions as you want. Don't be shy. Type the question into the question pane and click send, and we will be monitoring that as we go along. At the end, we'll be doing a live Q&A with time permitting. We'll take as many questions as we can. Again, type them into that little pane on the side. We'll provide responses to as much as we can today. Anything we can't go over today, we will get back to you online later. Reach out to us at Recruiting Blogs, and Matt's information will be available later as well. Go ahead and say hi now if you'd like. I'm watching the messages, and we'll make sure we got people staying active here. If you can't stay till the end, recording of the webinar comes within 48 hours. Follow on Twitter, #OurDaily. Another shout out to Lever, and now Matt, do your thing.
All right, well, that's going to be a hard act to follow. That was like the most animated webinar intro ever. So now I got to like bring the energy. But yeah, hi everyone, and welcome to Top Talent Trends for 2017. Topic I'm sure that you just aren't tired of hearing about. I think that my Google alert showed 6 trend posts come up this morning, and you know what? They all kind of look alike. So I would say with this, don't believe the hype, don't believe the statistics, and take everything I say with a grain of salt, because really, if I could see the future, I probably would have made better decisions to not end up doing a webinar on recruiting trends. But with that in mind, this is me. I am Dr. Matthew L. Charney, a renowned time traveler and futurist, which, by the way, is somebody's job title. Like, I kind of want that because it means you're never wrong, right? I'm actually not really a doctor, just like most thought leaders aren't really thought leaders, and most recruiting experts, myself included, aren't actually recruiters. And I'm pretty much, like I said, making all this up as a caveat. It's mostly educated guessing, but I have a lot of statistics to back it up. So that's how you find me on the Twitters. Hashtag is #OurDaily, because we're creative and cognizant of character limits. So first off, I'd like to start off by pouring one out for those homies who can't be with us. This webinar was originally supposed to be run by my associate, William Tincup, who is not able to make it today. And I'm going to warn you that when he started talking to me about HR executive trends, you know, we're going in kind of divergent directions from, I think, the original thesis here. Look, if I was an HR executive, I'd have a lot more cats and a lot more clothes from like Ann Taylor Loft. So I'm not going with an executive point of view. I'm going with the point of view for all of these, just a caveat, of somebody who watches this industry closely, but through the lens of technology, not compliance or SHRM credentials or any of those fun things it seems like HR leaders truly care about. So if you're looking for executive content, I hear really, really good things about HCI. But with that in mind, taking a little bit different, like, I'm sure you're all expecting to hear a lot about the following topics: candidate experience, the business case for diversity, big data, data-driven recruiting, the global nature of our workforce, millennials, and you can probably fill in the rest. These are the usual suspects. And other than saying that Kaiser Soze doesn't exist, I think that we can dispense with these and move on to what I think is actually going to happen, again, this educated guessing in the next year. So I'm going to start off with a trend that's probably going to occupy an inordinate amount of time, and that's convergence, which is a really cool word. And it's Cornerstone's user conference for all that matters. Essentially, what we're seeing this year is the disappearance of HR technology as a category. And what I mean by it is this. HR technology actually is stronger as an industry than it's ever been. We'll talk about that numerically in a second. But as you start seeing things like, Microsoft's acquisition of LinkedIn, we start seeing, we'll talk about some more examples, Google getting the action, Salesforce getting the action. Everyone's really trying to make a claim for the HR component of a larger enterprise suite. And in fact, in tracking deals, Crunchbase has stopped looking at HR and recruiting as a separate category. It's just enterprise technology. And I really think that's where we're going because of consolidation and because of this move to a single suite that kind of touches all of the endpoints of our daily existence. In the case of Microsoft, that's everything from fun social networking on LinkedIn to my terrible Xbox Live habit. Really, these are all part and parcel of a giant consumer technology grid. Amazon's a great example. Alexa, I'm looking for a career. You can actually ask it that. And it turns out it redirects you to Amazon's job site, which is creepy, admittedly. But it is what it is, right? So if only it was that easy to just push a button and move on. So what we're actually seeing here, this is traditionally what's called adoption curve. And the HR technology adoption curve versus the consumer curve, you can kind of see the distribution on the consumer side, of course, being in the red, and the I don't even know what colors to call those, the mauve kind of things are the HR technology breakdown in terms of adoption. This is a model that's proprietary and taken from Gartner. But one thing that you can really see is, unfortunately, we tend to lag the adoption of mainstream technologies pretty significantly. So a lot of what we're starting to see has actually already happened, and it has an antecedent within the world of just consumer or enterprise technology. With that said, though, this gap is really starting to compress, and one of the reasons for that is the ease of use and, again, the direction that things are going to be as user-friendly as possible. I know that any of you out there who are Taleo or Workday users has no idea what I'm talking about, but ultimately, we're going to stop seeing things like mobile recruiting or social recruiting or online recruiting. It's all just going to become a single discipline. And certainly, thank goodness, I've heard a lot less about the importance of having a mobile optimized site this year, or things of that nature, or how I can use Snapchat to recruit. So again, this curve, while we're still behind, is getting a little bit closer. So let's look at some of the examples that have just kind of come up over the last year or so of the fact that, guess what, we have moved from this back office backwater in HR to being like the sexiest category in tech. I say that from a very capitalistic standpoint, not in terms of what the software actually does. So there's a lot of money to be made here. And what we're starting to see is leading consumer brands actually pivoting to try to meet the capability gaps, or in some cases directly compete with what's traditionally been HR-specific solutions. Best example I can think of is Workplace by Facebook, as well as Facebook's rollout of a jobs tab, right? So you certainly have them positioning themselves as a project management, internal collaboration, team building, and recruiting tool, right? In something that used to be where you'd like stalk ex-girlfriends and occasionally post some sort of pity status update and let your friends know when you're playing Farmville. So really, we're seeing Facebook, which actually has about 1 in 3 internet users in the entire world log on to that site at least once a day. About 80% of the internet population's on it. So, if the mantra is fish where the fish are, or go to where your employees are going in order to make sure that you're heard, certainly one to watch. Similarly, you have Slack that's kind of moving into the space. a lot of really awesome integrations. And essentially, I think its success is that they built Facebook for work prior to Facebook launching it. Essentially, this just underscores the trend. If you ever use Slack, it's actually kind of fun and doesn't suck compared to like most project management software, your Basecamps or Asanas or anything that runs off of a .NET framework. So, that's a tool that's purely consumer that's really starting to see a lot of adoption, certainly within the HR and recruiting space. Then you have Salesforce. We'll talk about this idea of marketplace that they really started in a second, but you have entire deployments of products now that are being built exclusively on the Force.com platform and being sold exclusively through, Salesforce's sales channels. And Salesforce's sales channel. Say that one 10 times fast, right? So really what that is indicating is that a very, I would say, consumer-facing app is really starting to leverage its flexibility and its open APIs to start dipping its toes into this game. Adobe, similarly, we know them for their Creative Cloud products as well as their amazing EchoSign thing. They are definitely starting to make a play into the HR space, and particularly when it comes to paperless onboarding, verifications, and employee communications. So Adobe's actually opened an in-house VC fund to try to locate the next great thing in terms of bringing their suite into a full ERP. Obviously, IBM is a consumer brand, and just look no further than Watson, which certainly has dominated the hype around, quote, machine learning, artificial intelligence. It beat, Ken Jennings on Jeopardy. Other than that, we'll see what happens. But the awareness that that's built in terms of what's next, it might not be a smarter workforce, but it's certainly a smarter technology consumer. And hopefully, if nothing else, it will kill Boolean strings for good. Search engines have already done that, but people are still talking about it. And then finally, obviously, Google for Work. This is actually a presentation that was done all in Google's cloud and on their separate app, and it's part of their G Suite, right? And so Google also owns a significant amount of some of the larger players in the space through either their capital fund or acquisitions through Alphabet. So really, I think that with 85% of job seekers using Google to start their search, and I'm sure that all the Microsoft people listening are going to go, well, what about Bing? Bing, obviously, I think is going to essentially become LinkedIn, the search engine. So really look for Google to make trends. But essentially, all of these things in aggregate mean that, guess what? What you do on your personal devices and what you're doing on your work devices are going to look a lot alike. They're just going to be a little bit different instances and probably have much tighter permissioning. Other than that, same stuff, different use, right? So what's driving a lot of the focus here is money. Simply put, there is a lot of cash that's trying to fix this problem of, quote, hiring being broken. Now, I don't actually think that recruiting and HR are broken because of the fact that you have the lowest unemployment rate in over 10 years, the highest ever workforce participation rate, and as we'll see in a minute, turnover is slowing. And job stability is increasing. So if what we're doing is somehow broken, then I don't know if we should fix it, but there is sure a lot of money going to try. And the reason why is simple. You have a $14 billion projected spend on HR technology for the fiscal year 2017. So $14 billion, by the way, is enough where I could buy everyone in the state of Washington a large cup of Starbucks, or what do they call it, a venti Starbucks for a year, right? So that's a whole lot of cash. Now, it should be interesting to note, though, that $14 billion is only about half of what Microsoft paid for LinkedIn, which means that according to Berson's projections, borrowing the stat from Deloitte, I guess they know better than anyone, that means that essentially that's 50% of the overall market is LinkedIn. And spoiler alert, not a trend. I think that that's going to rapidly diminish, but either way, good luck paying that back if you just look at those numbers. So right here, and you will notice some lever cameos if you look closely. It's kind of like the Where's Waldo. Essentially, what you're seeing is less innovation and more iteration, but all of the large funds who are funding startups right now are really doubling down on this space and really making plays across the board from recruiting to payroll to performance management. But what's very interesting is the fact that these funds, rather than make an early investment in the case of like Anderson Horowitz, in LinkedIn and exit the space after, making bank, frankly, you're actually starting to make new plays. So this really breaks it down. 7% of venture capital firms actually comprise right now in HR technology, somewhere around 77 to 80%, depending on the projections of the overall financing market. So essentially, that means that all of these startup vendors aren't necessarily going to make it, but there's a perception that at least one in each of these holdings will. So what that's really doing is triggering a whole lot of innovation, because the cash is certainly going not only to the space, but also being concentrated within pockets that ostensibly could all come together and really become the next Oracle or SAP, particularly if you look at the top of that list. But again, all the money coming from very few sources and really driving innovation through competition, which is actually relatively rare if you look at the space. But nothing that you're seeing in 2017 or beyond is anything new, right? So it's all the same pitch. It's just refined for HR. So what's Uber for recruiting in HR? It's Hired.com and these candidate marketplaces. We used to call them split networks, but apparently it is an on-demand recruiting workforce now. So what do I know? You have Zillow, right, which is essentially giving you all the dirt on property, its ownership, and its value. That's much like VC darling the Muse, right, which predicates most of its product on office space and pretty pictures of beanbag chairs and slides in the cafeteria. And then you have like the Yelp for recruiting in HR, and that's Glassdoor, right? So if you go through these, all you're essentially seeing is name your consumer antecedent, and there's a recruiting or HR focused answer. So again, you're really starting to see convergence between these two sides. It's like that old Hollywood pitch. It's A meets B, and suddenly C becomes something new. And frankly, that's asinine with business technology. But when vampires meet Nazis, then you have a pretty good genre flip. I pitched that once, by the way. Okay, so again, consumer tech ultimately kind of merging with enterprise technology. Number two is that I think we're going to start very much seeing more of a focus, certainly in 2017, on retention as a recruiting and workforce planning methodology than what we're historically doing, which is looking outside the company as a reflex and not really having a solid plan around stemming attrition, helping people to advance and grow with their careers within a company, and really making a long-term investment as opposed to filling a short-term need. So here's kind of where we're at by the numbers. The average job tenure right now in the United States is 3.8. That's actually the highest it's been since 1996. So 3.8, almost 4 years average in a job. So that means the turnover is actually slowing down, which is both a function of low unemployment and the fact that people are for the most part doing well. This is why talent acquisitions become so much harder, is because most people are less willing to leave than they were before. However, that said, we still are able to fill our recs, and we're still able to find new talent, passive, active, qualified, marginally capable. Either way, we are still managing to close these roles, and in fact, that's being borne out by the fact that last month alone, there are 120,000 new jobs created in the United States. Problem is that of all of the new hires that we're making in recruiting, uh, over 1 in 4 leave within the first year, and that's just for exempt positions. That number is over 100%, obviously, for hourly. So that means that for all of the work that we're doing to bring in the best talent, we're really just doing a terrible job of keeping them in the company. And that really causes us to continually reinvent the wheel and do the same search over and over again, which I believe is the definition of insanity. And $1 out of $5 actually that's spent towards salary and compensation, which is the largest expense on any P&L, unless maybe your Wikipedia, which is 8 employees, it is spent actually backfilling for existing roles that were created by voluntary attrition, right? So that's like 20% of all of the money that is going into workers' pockets actually going to replacing them, which is funny because I bet if you were to give most workers a 20% increase, they're not going to go anywhere, although they only make 11% on average for leaving. So breaking down why it is that people leave companies not only helps us be able to identify, how we can speak to them from a recruiting standpoint, both employer brand, messaging, and value proposition, but also really how we can focus our efforts internally on this nebulous concept of engagement, right? So let's pat ourselves in the back right now. Engagement, hot topic, pulse surveys, probably their own category of vendor at the moment. It's at an all-time high, which is awesome. Unfortunately, that all-time high is sitting right now at around 34%, right? Which means that if you're the average company, 2/3 of your workforce, even though you have a fancy careers page and a great score on employee review sites, still are looking to leave because they hate you. So with that said, here's really the reason why people leave companies and what I would suggest in 2017, focusing on really building some capabilities around. The first, and this is always the case, this is the most recent data set, is limited career promotion opportunities. Now, almost every job description eschews the idea of this being a backfill to do a very specific job. It's all very aspirational language. Oh, you can come grow your career here. We're more than just a job. Whatever sort of flowery stuff you want to put in that copy. The problem is we're actually terrible at delivering that, which is why you see the cyclical nature of people moving out to move up. So one thing that I definitely am starting to see within the enterprise space is the creation of capabilities, and certainly I think in 2017, in the next few years, we're going to start seeing this become very commonplace, is the idea of an internal career and talent mobility expert, which is somebody whose entire focus is recruiting from the internal employee population for open roles and being the conduit between employees and open roles, as opposed to what's now largely an opt-in process. I see this becoming much more active and much more concerted effort to not only identify high pos, but make sure that everyone else is moving up who should be. Certainly performance management plays a huge role in that, but I think that a little TLC and maybe not having to get your manager's approval prior to applying for a job you see posted probably going to make a big difference in upping what's already the #1 source of overall hire. Obviously, supervisor didn't show respect or support. That's an easy enough issue to suss out, I would say as well. If a manager is getting crappy performance reviews or you have one of those ER files on somebody like a mile long, probably rather lose them than the direct reports, the 6, 7, 8 people below them. Far easier to fill a manager role or supervisor role than it is a bunch of specialized individual contributors. And then finally, compensation. Guess what? That's not a trend. That's actually never going to change. Unfortunately, real wage growth looks like it's going to remain stagnant, and it looks like income inequality is going to increase in 2017. That's nothing new, but I, for reasons we'll discuss in a minute, do see that accelerating, right? So what you see here again is some statistics. No, we love numbers, right? Essentially, what this means is that only 29% of companies actually have any sort of way to recruit internal candidates, and only 32% have a formal retention strategy, which frankly is just terrible because that means that more companies actually have a candidate experience strategy than they do one for a employee experience strategy by a multiple about two, which is just ridiculous, right? And even worse is the 12% of companies only that have a formalized policy around internal hiring or transfers. Ridiculous. So I think that we're finally going to wake up to the fact that in most cases, guess what? We know our next candidate. So breakdown in aggregate, this is about 600,000 filled jobs in 2016. What you see is that of interviews at Fortune 500 employers, 50% are internal, 50% are external. There are an average 3 internal candidates who apply for a role. There are an average of 206 external candidates that apply for a posted position. So if you really want to hit the low-hanging fruits, just take a look at that interview breakdown when it comes to slating, and I don't know why you're spending your time figuring out like the next like awesome Chrome extension to find out phone numbers is when you've got them all and it's sitting in an HCM. All right, and then you break it down into hires. All of the hires made in aggregate this year, 59% actually came from internal transfers or promotions. 41% came from all external sources of hire, and if we break that down even further, what's the number one external source of hire? Employee referrals, in fact, are number one. Job boards on here are ranked number one. I think I pulled the wrong slide. And career sites, huh? Employee referrals are number one. I think this is breaking down something different, but you get the point. It's a pretty pie chart. Either way, if you even combine the 25% referral number along with the, this is the same data set, the 59%, I'm not good at math, but that tells me that like something like 8 and 10, if I'm doing that right. People are coming through either an existing employment relationship or through somebody who you already employ, so probably not worth the 35% of external hires that you're spending buku bucks on that source, and probably not so much for the employer brand stuff on that pretty career site that then knocks you over to often a terrible ATS landing page. So all I have to say is that, again, look inside before you look out. And if you have to look out, then ask your people, because just looking at ROI, we all are doing more with less. Referrals are 400 times more likely to end in a hire than somebody who blindly applies for a job on one of those job boards. But that's where we're really spending most of our focus and time, and times they are changing. This is another, thing that reinforces the business value of referrals. I don't know that I need to be doing that. Certainly, when you look at that source of breakdown, people who are referred stay longer and end up, as a general rule, having a much more longevity within a company. So definitely it knocks down that turnover number, the voluntary attrition number, and increases things like engagement, productivity, and satisfaction, all of which are good for that whole employer brand thing you're probably sinking too much money into. Okay, so retention, focus on that, and recruiting becomes really easy. Like, not any sort of genius there. But speaking of genius, let's talk about my favorite topic, AI, or artificial intelligence, not just a really cool Jude Law movie. So this is my boy Clippy. This is one of the first examples of what we're now mistakenly calling artificial intelligence, which is, hey, ask me a question, and if it's in my data set, I'll pull you a stock response. That's really kind of the fundamental, basis and baseline for what we call artificial intelligence. And that's just dumb, frankly. But it does bear noting that Clippy actually lives on and is the basis for what's now the largest bot framework in the world. So he's the original bot built on the Microsoft bot framework, along with probably most of the point solutions that you're using today. So maybe time to rethink that that paperclip. Um, Look, there's a lot of stuff. This is specific to jobs, 2004 to present. You can just kind of see on Google the search volume for artificial intelligence and machine learning. Definitely buzzwords. However, the only thing that I think that artificial intelligence and machine learning have taught us is that, in fact, we are probably getting dumber as we become more reliant on sort of these machines. Google's a great example of that, right? It can auto-suggest, your term based off of overall search volume, but it can't actually predict what it is that you're looking for results-wise, right? So historical data is great, but it can't predict the future whatsoever. And when it comes to where we're at in terms of like Moore's law, if you're familiar with that, between what humans are capable of and what computers are capable of, as much as we'd like to say the machines are coming, we're ways off from Skynet right now. Okay, so definitely there are some limitations. So don't overly rely in 2017 on technology to do what only you as a human being is capable of, things like emotional intelligence, empathy, or dealing with the variables of human emotion that make ER investigations and offer negotiation so much damn fun. Okay, so I've read a lot of these trend articles that say HR is going to be replaced by robots, or recruiting and sourcing are genuinely going to be wiped out by some of these technologies. And in fact, I think rumors of our death have actually been greatly exaggerated. These are kind of the four control questions that you can ask about any job set with a high degree of correlation to see whether that job actually is replaceable, which is, do you need to come up with clever solutions? Does your job require you to squeeze into small spaces? Are you required to personally help others? And does your job require negotiation? I think that every single one of these, obviously, for HR and recruiting is true. And so the good news is that you should actually embrace these technologies. I think like a lot of times we fear them. They actually help to augment and enhance rather than replace what we've already got, what we're capable of. So it's all about automation and efficiency. It's not about artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? We have some real dumb things we got to worry about first, like OFCCP and talking about diversity. So the one thing I will say, though, is that while HR and recruiting are safe, unfortunately, a lot of positions aren't. So automation actually will probably kill some jobs. We're already seeing that in manufacturing. This is just the spread of the likelihood of those being replaced. Non-routine cognitive is a fancy way of saying that if you are doing a job like bookkeeping or payroll, probably you're going to get replaced by a robot real soon. Non-routine manual is saying that basically you deal with a dynamic job, you're not in an assembly line, and most of what you're doing you're making up as you go along, which kind of recruiting, right? So the less skill you have, the more likely you are to be replaced by a machine. So probably should hold true for HR generalists, which have low skill from what I can see, but actually about 32% likelihood that HR managers and directors are going to be automated away within the next 25 years, which is actually one of the least likely jobs. 225th out of 366 job categories that BLS lists. So very little likelihood that other than that comp specialist that they're going to be a robot working next to you in a cube anytime soon. One job that is actually the lowest probability is mine, which is a writer or editor. That said, we also don't get paid all that much. So we'll continue to toil without machines for a little money. So if you've got a gig in HR, stick with it 2017 and beyond. Don't pretend you're in marketing or anything else. Those are far more likely to get replaced by automation and these advances in technology than your current gig, which is pretty cush. So if you look, in fact, at HR automation as a spend, this was a survey that was done by Software Advice. Um, only 35% of companies plan to actually invest anything in machine learning, AI, or any of that stuff in the next 3 years, which basically a lifetime. But certainly in 2017, nothing to worry about. And in terms of how work gets done in the space, to a chart from IDC, manual methods still make up 48% of everything that's done in HR, which is why you're still tracking stuff on an Excel spreadsheet. And as big and as cool a category as technology is, guess what? Only 19% of all HR functions are done through tech. So again, why do people look for artificial intelligence or machine learning or any of these capabilities? It's actually not got a lot to do with cost savings from a employee perspective. It's only 12% of people generally are tending to opt for these in order to cut staff. All of the outcomes that are the most common, which is process automation and increased efficiency, right? That's really what we're looking at, and those are on some good things, but those are why companies are actually looking at this sort of category, as opposed to what we're talking about, which is the robots are coming for our jobs tomorrow, which is hilarious on many levels. So this right here, you look at 2020, so 3 years out, 49% of all U.S. workers are going to be completely unaffected on a day-to-day basis by anything we're talking about. So fortunately, we're not them, but most people, it doesn't really matter as much as we'd like to talk about this trending topic. Okay, so I'm missing a, there we go. I got my slides out of order. See, I'm going crazy here. And ironically, this is the big trend that I see this year, and one that I really hope that after our most recent presidential security breach, and as popular as white label secured servers were as a trending topic this year, it's something that is HR needs to pay attention to this. It is the next compliance battlefield, right? Nobody in a few years, and certainly you're going to see this in terms of priority and urgency in 2017, is really going to care about EOE, AA, and OSCCP, or GINA, or any of the other stuff that they give SHRM certification credits to. Really, everything in compliance, everything in terms of HR capabilities, record keeping, and process are really going to be built not around the concept of democratization, but rather security, something we're already seeing with Safe Harbor in Europe. So one thing that I think is really important to note is actually, while we talk about the CIO and the IT organization is largely being the arbiters of data security and network protection, in fact, most people actually shouldn't be afraid of external actors. It's relatively rare, as we'll see in a second, that there is a malicious breach that's intentionally caused that compromises internal or proprietary data. And 53% of all the time, that is actually caused by an internal actor, meaning that your employees are much more likely than a competitor, a sovereign state, or that nerdy kid who knows how to code real well, doing black hat next to you. Essentially, your employees are a huge liability, particularly when it comes to these consolidated systems that have all of our data stored in there. Look no further, again, than the fact that the Russians were apparently able to get in the DNC server by phishing through a fake Google message, and you see that human error is a significant liability for all of us, which means that HR, as the compliance police here, are really going to have to double down on data privacy policies and enforcing these, as opposed to talking about soft stuff like how to make our workforce more diverse. Like, I hate to keep harping on that, but any sort of data theft is agnostic to protected category. It will be stolen and used without regard to whether or not you have a balanced and inclusionary workforce. So other thing I just want to point out here, I think it's an interesting stat. One of the big reasons that HR has been resistant to going to the cloud from these crappy legacy on-premise systems that like look like something out of HAL in 2001: A Space Odyssey is, it's not secure. Our data is not secure. If we put it in the cloud, everyone will be able to steal it. That's actually not the case. And in fact, of all the data breaches across the entire spectrum that happened in this last year, 22% came because of manual or paper-based processes. So in other words, there's a much higher likelihood that file cabinet full of job applications or offer letters is going to get misappropriated in some way than your secure cloud instance. So if that's the reason why you're still using an on-premise system, for those of you who still are, I'm very sorry. But definitely, that's not an argument at all. What is an argument to look at, again, is that executives and individual contributors are the most likely people to not pay any attention to data privacy. And those are the populations, honestly, that you have to look out for. For some reason, HR always thinks contractors, consultants, vendors, anyone who's not a full W-2 employee are going to be the ones who they have to worry about. Statistically, absolutely ridiculous. They're the most careful with data, probably because they know what's at risk, whereas executives don't think it applies to them until their Ashley Madison email is leaked online. Okay, so yeah, 15% of all data breaches, period, in 2015, it's the oldest one, were employee error negligence. Most common among those, actually, is losing your work phone and having it taken by somebody who shouldn't have it, right? Because most of these, you're able to access everything from that magical mobile device, which is a great thing for candidate experience recruiting. It's a terrible thing if it means you're going to get drunk and leave your cell phone at a bar. Not that I would ever do such a thing or have ever done such a thing, but certainly that is about twice as much as theft of trade secrets, and that's really, I think, another thing we need to know is that, again, it's our employees we should worry about. Hate to do that. So here's what hackers want. So this is the personal identifiable information, PII, or personal identifiable data, if you're British, that was compromised in security leaks in 2015. Physical address, social security number, checking account, driver's license. The top four, those are all owned and reside within an HCM system, right? Driver's license, maybe not as much. Certainly checking account for direct deposit, that's a payroll vendor. Social security number, that's in both your ATS and HCM. Physical address, pretty much everywhere. So you just need to know in 2017 that you are the stewards to the most precious and most corruptible resource that any company has. Guess what? The greatest asset's no longer your employees. As cool as a tagline as that is, it's actually the data about your employees. That's your biggest asset, and so you want to keep that secure, right? And so obviously, if this is what hackers are going after, you're probably not safe if you're not paying attention. So think about your ATS or HCM for a minute. The millions and millions of records that some employers have in there. It costs an average of $170 for every record that's compromised in order to clean it up, indemnify a company, or any sort of related damages. So $170 per record. The average, and this is, I'm sorry, an Oracle statistic because, they're 80-some% of the ATS market for some odd reason, something that I hope will stop in 2017, is 1.2 million records are being housed within enterprise software. So 170 times $1.2 million is a big old opportunity cost that far dwarfs, anything that we look at in recruiting analytics in terms of bottom line impact, right? Like that's the opportunity cost, and it's one nobody wants to pay. So they asked a bunch of CIOs. This is from the Panama Institute, which is something that I've never heard of, but it sounds really fancy and it's peer-reviewed. So they asked a bunch of CIOs, why is that employees seem to be the ones who are giving up the keys to the kingdom, as opposed to, all of these network threats coming from external actors. Broke it down, lack of in-house expertise. So I would say that for HR and recruiters, this is a great opportunity to build up that expertise, because guess what? That's a critical business skill that is largely absent in many organizations right now. Lack of leadership or ownership, which we saw because executives were the most likely people, obviously, to not give a crap about data policies or privacy. And then organizational silos or turf issues when that ATS hits an HCM. And you have to completely start a new record and migrate everything from one system to another, and they don't speak the same language. Those are actually two hackable systems, and you probably want to double down and consolidate where possible. But because we are territorial with our information, every single time you cut off another department, it creates another potential vulnerability. So how do we fix this in 2017? How do we get better about protecting our HR data? Training, number one, pretty darn easy. Only 46% have any sort of training or material around this that they deliver to employees, right? And 60%, even after their data is breached, don't amend that. So that seems pretty stupid. Just basic stuff, like if somebody's you don't recognize is asking you to send proprietary information, probably think twice about it. Personality theft, identity theft. Personality theft is, of course, a employer branding exercise, but identity theft is the fastest growing crime out there. So, your employees are at risk. It's going to cost you a lot of money. And a culture of security, I think, is a good one. Basically, always be vigilant. Just like, you're always under the assumption that your documentation is going to be recovered in an audit by the OFCCP, which I think like the Department of Labor has like 410 somewhere in there. Very few people auditing that full time, whereas there is an infinite amount of potential external threats that are out there. Make sure that just like we know coming in day one what sexual harassment is, we know what data security is as an employee, and that we in HR are able to facilitate building that into the culture of our companies, because frankly, that is the culture that matters a whole lot more than free lunch on Fridays. Okay, so number 5, big data is not a big deal anymore, okay? What we're actually starting to see is what you can do with that data, and this is really cool. So here's big data, big circle. Here's actually what we need is that little point. So that said, in terms of looking at kind of data visualization and best practices, this is my little drawing of every backend in the world that your recruiting vendor selling you is like dashboarding or predictive analytics. It's essentially the same thing if you look at it without the UI. UX is Excel. It's just got some pretty pictures and probably some Tableau running in the background to render the colors a little bit differently. This is essentially what you're paying for, and this is not exciting. This is a moment in time sort of snapshot, right? Where we're really going with this data is not how do we make a better hire and get that get somebody who's going to stick around with greater likelihood than somebody else. What we're actually doing with this is we are redefining what the org chart in our organization looks like in a way that's no longer linear or hierarchical, but rather one that mirrors our culture. I really like this cartoon because it's got a bunch of different organizational charts. While it's a joke, these may reflect your organization. You have Amazon, everything's tied in through the cloud, obviously. Facebook, connected by a social graph. Microsoft, a bunch of territories with everyone pretty much holding each other hostage. Google, everything's connected. And of course, our friends at Oracle, also known as the place where all good programmers go to die. You have like 6 engineers and hundreds of lawyers. So point is that org chart's not a fluid and linear thing anymore, and even within the tech sector. So one thing that big data is really going to start enabling us to do much more is to move from this formal structure here. This is a Columbia Business School classic case study here on who to promote. But I am reappropriating it because I doubt many of you went to Columbia Business. So you have the formal structure, which is what we hire for and what we do succession planning and workforce management around. But really, it's the informal structure of the way people are connected that's of much more value for any HR recruiting related outcome. And it almost never looks like an actual reporting hierarchy. Okay. So what you see rather than people having an up-down relationship is that everyone is sort of interconnected, and some people are more connected than other people. And those are the people who we call nodes, and they're the ones with the power, right? So we talk or have talked a lot about building brand advocates or identifying, the people who you want to put out there, or which employees you should ask for referrals or make a part of your hiring team. Like, we actually have this information. So this drawing right here is actually a visual representation of my Facebook network. And what you can really see is who the most influential people are. And obviously, that's kind of the holy grail for HR, and one we're getting very close to, is identifying relative internal influence. This is done by number of connections. How many people do you know in the company? Frequency of shared connections. How many people do you know that somebody else knows, right? Being much more valuable if you know somebody that very few people do, like that one dude in New Zealand who's a contractor. Diversity of connections. So how many different departments, locations, geographies, and whatnot are you connected with within an organization? Smokers are great at this, right? The smoke break is the great meeting of the minds in most organizations, where a bunch of disparate people across levels and departments come together to gossip. That's really what we're starting to see programmatically prove itself in the digital space, and also how information flows, all information that's sitting in your messaging platform. And as we start to get around this again, you don't want to go after everyone to post a job or give referrals. You want to go after the people who are going to be the most, who are what we call connectors. And those are the same people who you want to really focus your retention efforts on, because again, that's that person who, when they leave, the entire department goes with them, but you never know who that person generally is until it's too late. So this is giving us a way to do it, and with SNA, and there are a lot of tools, we can not only redefine the org chart, but also our talent acquisition strategy. We can also, take a little bit different look at diversity as being more of an inclusion sort of approach. And here's why this really matters. So this is a network effect of how well connected and influential people from various academic disciplines are. And what you see when you chart out these various connections is that, using computer science as an example, Stanford obviously #1 by a long shot, but in fact, they don't know all that many people who didn't go to Stanford. They don't work with all that many people who didn't go to Stanford. And frankly, if Stanford's admissions criteria somehow changed or was altered, then everyone's kind of stuck with that, because you have a very desirable but very, very condensed sort of network effect. So who do you know? Chances are, if you ask a Stanford computer science alum, it's all going to be the same 22 engineers. However, while you wouldn't think of it, of all the computer science majors out there, Montana State, because ostensibly nobody stays there, they teach a bunch of different languages, and I looked into one of the reasons why, and they do very specific training in terms of like coding and developing for platforms as opposed to theory. That's actually where you'd want to go in order to build that intellectual diversity and inclusion of different perspectives and experiences, because those people have access to a much wider array of experiences and perspectives than that Stanford grad, even though most employers would automatically and reflexively hire the person from, quote, the better school. Business, just kind of take a look there. Very much the same thing. Stanford, probably not as good as Mendoza at Notre Dame, which, while flying under the radar, those Fighting Irish are fighting their ways to really, really good active networks and tend to be very influential within them when compared to other test groups. So I hope that's enough data. I literally tried to pull all of this together to somehow form my prognostications, and this is all I could think of the entire time, right? So when it comes to all this, again, I'm just going to leave with this quote I really like. People who live at the intersection of social worlds are at a higher risk of having good ideas. If you really want to drive innovation, if you really want to do all of the stuff that you pay lip service to in terms of being a leader in your space and changing lives, the key is not diversity, it's actually inclusion, because the more people who can be included from a network perspective analysis, the better off you're going to be for all of the reasons that we're spending $70 billion a year on corporate diversity initiatives only can be quantified. Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. These are common sense. I'm not going to dwell too much on these, but I would urge you all to check Recruiting Daily tomorrow, like how that tie-in works, to get some more information on this. So the marketplace of middleware. So essentially, everyone's trying to become a hub with a bunch of point solutions as spokes. Problem is that if you own the real estate and rent it out to a bunch of people, you can't necessarily speak to the people who are subletting. Candidate experience, guess what? It's got nothing to do with recruiter mindsets. It's got probably little to do with your technology. It's got everything to do with UI, UX, and it's a design discipline and should not be looked at otherwise. The blended workforce, contractors, consultants, exempt, non-exempt, 4 generations, all working together. Guess what? An employee is not necessarily an employee anymore. Getting back to the basics, I think that as high tech starts to proliferate, high touch is what's going to win in 2017. The ability to make a human connection is something that a computer will never be able to do, and it is the only reason why companies are paying for you. So whether that's relationship building, whether that's figuring out and recommitting to personalizing emails or writing compelling job descriptions, we're really, I think, going to see that automation is working so well in the background in a lot of this stuff that we can really focus on the fundamentals. And finally, look, trend data is stupid. Something's going to work for you might not work at another company, and what works at another company might not work for you. So don't pay attention to what everyone else is necessarily doing. Pay attention to what's driving results. And just because it's new doesn't mean that you should change if the old way works. So take that with a grain of salt. And hopefully 2017 will look a lot different than every other year, because up until now, HR and recruiting, kind of same stuff, different year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to how Lever can help.
Hey, Matt, that's great. This is Leela from Lever. May I just say, Matt, not to kiss ass too much, but that was a vintage performance. I really enjoyed your comments. So what I wanted to do was just highlight 2 or 3 things that tie back into to what Matt was saying about the future direction of HR tech and some trends to be aware of. So toward the end there, first of all, he talked about the importance of UI, UX, and recruiting by design. And I think when you look at Lever as an applicant tracking system with CRM functionality built into it, we've really succeeded in helping our clients to create a superior recruiting experience, both for candidates and for hiring managers. Both are extremely important in the recruiting process. So on slide there, you see a quote, just one of many quotes that we get. We get quotes every week from candidates who are really appreciative of the seamless experience that we can deliver to them. And then critically, a quote from a hiring manager just talking about how Lever has really made his life easier and enabled him to work faster and in collaboration with his recruiting team. So we agree, design, super important. We'd love to support you there. Secondly, Matt talks about getting back to basics, the fundamentals, and he's absolutely right. This idea of human connection and engagement has always been at the center of recruitment, and we pride ourselves on having built technology that really allows recruiters to focus on building that communication back with candidates and being timely with their responses. And so a quote here from Adam at KPMG New Zealand, because they've been able to really focus on the fundamentals and get through the administrative work quicker, their offer rate has gone up from the low 80 percentage points to high 90s. So instant results by bringing a more intuitive and fast platform in. The last thing, automation. So we agree, AI is not going to replace recruiting. Recruiters are just as important as ever. But what technology can do is automate all the boring administrative tasks out of your life so that you can focus on that message. I'm sure none of you got into recruiting to be administrators. And so with Lever Nurture, which we launched just last month, you can add that seamlessly into your ATS and build out some crazy powerful workflow automation that enables you to focus on the conversation and getting a passive candidate to get involved and say yes and get engaged. So that is just a flavor of how we feel that we can really help recruiting leaders and their teams to embrace these new trends and get with the program in 2017. We'd love to show you for yourself. So please do sign up. You can get a demo from our website. If you mention Matt Charney, we'll have to think of some special treat to give them, Matt. But yeah, we'd love you to come and check out what we have to offer.
Yeah, no, and so apologize for being quite bombastic with this and giving short shrift. I wouldn't normally say this, but Lever kind of anticipates all of these trends, particularly consumerization. It's basically trying to do to the ATS what Chrome did to Internet Explorer, and God bless them for it. So thank you, Leela, and everyone over there for not only sponsoring this webinar, but also for building an awesome product and one that looks a lot like the future in 2017, and that is an unpaid endorsement. So just so you know, we went fast, but all of these, everyone who is on this will be receiving a recording and the slides within 48 hours, and check back Recruiting Daily tomorrow, where I will break down those last 5, and that's how to stay in touch, because you sourcers didn't know how to do that. So with that, thank you again, and appreciate you all tuning in. Good luck in 2017, and keep kicking some hiring butt.